Can family.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
About 3 o'clock. We're going to be at
Burlington.
testimony on 778. I believe Christian
Myers.
This is first.
Never heard their jingle, huh?
Ever seen that commercial?
You guys were live.
We're live.
Okay. Hi, thank you all for having us today. Christian Meyer, Director of Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. I'm here with my Emergency Management Planner, Keith Cubbin. I'll give some basic remarks about our reading of the bill as we've seen it, House 778. Keith, we also mentioned in the email there might be some questions about the 23 flooding event. Keith, as our emergency planner, can answer any questions in that regard. And we're also happy just to answer questions you may have about the RPCs and what role we think we can play. Keep it as informal as you'd like, but I'll give us some things to start with in any case. I participated in the dam emergency management, the Emergency Operations Planning Study Committee. Through the course of that committee, we heard a lot about the work they've done in Chittenden and with the communities downstream the Chittenden Reservoir. And coming away from that work, they've been able to pull together regular meetings, build relationships between municipal officials, the dam operators, and other concerned parties. They're able to not only create an emergency operation plan, but we're able to apply for and purchase some equipment to improve their response to an emergency, all stemming out of those relationships and what started as meetings. I came away from that as a regional planner, thinking the need that we have for it locally in Vermont. I know you all spoke to Michael Billingsley earlier in the day, and how we might be able to support communities like Plainfield as they work on work towards these goals. Here in Central Vermont, we have the Waterbury Dam at Wrightsville. We have the East Barry Dam and Marshfield number 6, all of which stand directly above historic villages, towns, cities. So in so much as we've seen that communication can be stressed during an emergency event, the idea of having open lines of communication laid out and conceived beforehand seems obvious and important. It reflects the work we've done with municipalities through their local emergency planning documents. And from what I've read and from my understanding of the current draft of 778, it progresses this system. Traditionally, RPCs have helped with emergency planning, mitigation, resilience, adaptation, recovery for our municipalities, where we give those. My understanding is this role grew out of Irene and the planning that went in, planning immediately following that event, recognizing that there was a gap between the state and the local needs, and the identification of RPCs as being able to step in and fill that gap with those existing municipal relationships. We're able, in that sense, to provide a point of contact, a person, a friendly face, someone municipalities know and can call and get the resources they need, not just in the days following an emergency event or the weeks following an emergency event, but really in the years following an emergency event as they start planning for the next emergency or disaster. So, of course, all this work is underpinned by long-term funding that we've been able to get through the FEMA Emergency Management Planning Grant, which, due to federal delays and cuts, is somewhat on rocky territory now. So, well, I think RPCs are open to this idea as it's laid out and open to the idea that we can support municipalities' plan for the risks associated with these high hazard dams. We're in this sort of unstable position around our long-term, emergency funding based on these federal actions. So that's more or less all I have to say prepared, but again, happy to take questions or speak to more specific issues.
Representative Chig.
I think it'd be helpful if you talk a little bit just about Central Vermont, given that we've just heard a bunch from Plainfield and have a number of dams, both state-owned and otherwise, that have, there are high hazard dams. I guess I just a little bit about, I'm curious about the sort of municipal context, the EMS, how municipalities at EMS, but not every town has its own EMS provider, like how you see the capacity. I guess I would start with capacity in our region. And then maybe also sort of how you interact with all, do you have relationships with every one of those entities in your region? And what does it take to get an entire region downstream of a dam like Marshfield or Waterbury to coordinate on a project like this? Do you have something equivalent that you already do? You could spend a little time talking about this.
You can start on that. You know the actors better.
Yeah, we work directly with Capital Fire Mutual Aid, which is the parent organization of almost all the fire departments within the region. We do have some relationship with individual fire departments, but that's kind of on a personal basis. If they reach out to us, we are definitely willing to work with any of them, but it's basically whether they're accessing our services. We have time constraints and funding constraints. So, we're not always going out there trying to start those new relationships as often as we'd really like. But, we try to do as much as possible. There definitely would be constraints in a lot of our towns. We have a number of towns that the emergency management director is also on the fire department. So in any event, they're going to be out there most likely trying to evacuate people, where ideally those are two separate positions in each town, because that way the EMD can actually coordinate the response or any needs that the fire department might need as they're evacuating people. They would be that communication piece that goes back and forth to the state or to us at the RPC, where we would then funnel that up to the state, to Vermont Emergency Management. So it definitely varies. Like thinking of worst case scenario in a dam event, we would definitely need all the capacity we could get. So any pre-planning we could do ahead of time would pay huge dividends, to actually have a plan, because otherwise it's literally going to be people just going door to door, and they might not even coordinate that well, because even developing routes that you would have for evacuating people, because you definitely don't want to have two different people going in the same direction, because somebody, they're then putting themselves at risk. You want to be minimizing that as much as possible. Also thinking of state resources in that kind of event, we'd probably want to try to utilizing some kind of geofencing or something, where we're sending something directly out to all the cell phones in that region. You would want to get the word out as fast and as furiously as possible so that you can, get everyone moving to higher ground. But we definitely would, especially thinking of the upper valley towns below Marshfield 6, Route 2 is not an evacuation route at all. Hard stop. If you were on there and that dam failed, you're going to die. The chances are really high of that, because that road goes under in every flood we've had. In 2023, it was completely impassable. 24, there were a few culverts that may have blown out in there as well. So you have to plan that accordingly of where are we going to evacuate those people? And it might not be the main route that you would normally think of. I'm thinking of Waterbury, the same thing. 89 isn't going to be an evacuation route if Waterbury didn't fail. Same with 2. So, any pre-planning we can do to think of that ahead of time, I think would definitely pay dividends. If God forbid that ever happened, obviously that would be everyone's worst day.
Maybe I didn't phrase this quite right, but I'm really curious about your role in potentially being a contracted partner. So RPCs aren't listed in this bill.
Okay.
But VEM, this bill puts the onus on VEM to create these regional emergency operations plans. And our VEM director is here in the room, he's testifying tomorrow, but so if you want to jump in, let us know. But VEM could contract with a partner to develop, to pull all the parties together. And I guess I was sort of presuming you would fare sort of whether you're willing to play that kind of a role with VEM, whether you already do that kind of partnership. And really like, so for the pre-planning work, not the in the moment in an emergency, which we hope really frankly never happens, right? Like we're hoping that isn't the case and very low likelihood, but the planning we're trying to say should happen. So in the event of that planning work, what would your role be? And do you know, how, if VEM was looking to you for support and partnership in developing a regional plan, how do you go about pulling all the municipalities and the EMS providers from multiple jurisdictions together? And that's something you do regularly, and do you have some equivalent example you could share with us?
Yeah, I can use it. So Green Mountain Power does do an exercise that they do with Marshfield 6. It's on a probably bi-year, every 3 years, something around that basis. It's not a yearly endeavor. We help coordinate with all the fire departments to get them to attend that and try to get as much representation as possible. And the RPCs definitely could handle that level of coordination of bringing people together to try to have those conversations. It would be kind of like at least from my perspective, thinking about it, it'd be kind of like a local hazard mitigation plan, except you're using a larger framework for it. So, organizing that to do that planning and even to do the mapping, I believe, almost every RPC, or I believe all the RPCs do have GIS people on staff. I know we in our region definitely do. So that level of planning could be done by the RPCs, definitely.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that is one of our strengths at the regional level, is that convener, that facilitator. I mentioned Rutland Regional Planning Commission has helped, who was not the instigator of the Chittenden emergency operation plan, but once those relationships had congealed, they were able to come in and start saying, all right, we're going to organize the meeting, we're going to get the agenda, we're going to get the food, we're going to get the venue, we're going to make sure there's a place for all the people who need to be talking to meet, and we're going to make this easy and grease the skids to make sure this keeps moving. And so to that end, I think we are well suited to play that role. We are also very aware of where our limitations are, and when engineering or technical needs are necessary, we will contract for that type of work.
Boston.
Hi, thank you. So, having been a school counselor and working on safety committees, do schools, I know schools have emergency plans. I'm wondering, is flooding in there where they have routes and drills and plans in place?
I can speak just one quick example, and then I'll turn it over to you because you do know the plans better than I do. In a former time when we had Vermont Yankee down in the southern part of the state, the RPC was very much involved in the planning of those evacuation routes and had to go through that regularly and help convene, and even did some of that mapping. So that's related directly to an emergency event and where an RPC is helping. But in terms of actual specific flood response,
To be honest, I don't deal with the schools that often. I do know because Twinfield, you talked with Michael Billingsley. I helped him some when he was working with Twinfield School because of its location. They were concerned with flooding there, and especially due to the access to the school. Because if the Winooski flood location, the school could be cut off. So thinking of that evacuation planning of the school and where do you reunite the parents, the whole deal with that.
Yeah.
So some schools have, but across the board, I do not know. Eric might be able to provide more information because I know that
And
VM
you're
does.
testifying tomorrow, right? Yeah, so.
In general, the Vermont School Safety Center is working with the schools. So that's an entity that is currently under VEM, but it's going to move under Homeland Security. But they work with the schools to create emergency operations plans. And Act 29 did some adjustments to that. Specifically, I don't know if they're more all hazards. So flooding and fires, intruders are all in there.
Do you mind introducing yourself for the record?
I'm Eric
Sorry.
Thorne. I'm the Director of Vermont Emergency Management.
Sorry. And just the other, have you identified let's say at the time of the flood, who would be, not names, but positions to be at the command center? who would be expected to be, I imagine you'd have a command center.
So there is the emergency action plan,
Yeah.
as Keith mentioned earlier, which has sort of that initial phone tree.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the emergency operation plan, we're kind of thinking about what exists beyond that initial phone tree, and maybe you're able to speak to who the municipal reps, or municipal appointments would be at that command center.
Yeah, an emergency operations center for a dam failure. Be honest, I mean, obviously you would want to have whoever the owner dam entity is, and anybody from dam safety.
Yeah,
But then you would probably want a rep from each town that you're expecting, or at least a contact person, with our town nature not having that regional government, it is a little tougher because, then you don't really need a rep from each town going down. You definitely want to have a line of communication with them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you facilitate that as far as
Right.
who's in the overall command structure?
Right.
That would have to be determined.
In the Chittenden example, there's everything from the chief of police of Rutland
Yeah.
all the way up to the emergency management director in the town Chittenden. So the volunteer in that position. So it could be a broad range of people as well.
Is a governor or is there anybody in a high position in government?
I'd have to look back at our conversations
be.
with them.
Good thing. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, guys, for your presentation and your willingness to share with us. We've heard a lot today and from about the importance of having an evacuation plan, knowing the routes and all that. That all seems to me very like after the fact, right? I mean, okay, good to have a plan in place. Everybody knows where they're gonna go, but and when we heard earlier that they got like 50 seconds or something like that, there's a damn breach. I mean, nothing's gonna happen in 50 seconds. You're not even gonna get the siren spun up. If you had a siren, if that was part of the plan in 50 seconds. So it seems to me that to get a little bit more warning on these things, you wouldn't want to just be statically watching the water level rise. You'd want to, 2 or 3 day weather predictions are getting pretty good. Granted, maybe not super duper, but within 24 hours they're getting pretty darn good. And if we had just rain gauges, in the strategically positioned throughout the entire watershed for these dams that are of questionable nature, it seemed like we could get a pretty good advanced warning before the water level in the dam itself rises to a level of danger. Well before, like hours, even days before. Is that all part of the emergency operation plan, is to do all that technical measurement and have eyes on that on a regular basis when the rain is coming?
Yeah, most of that is being done, thankfully, as part of the emergency action plans. It gets super difficult to keep the two things. There's operations plans and action plans, but the action plans, and Keith and I have sat through those tabletop scenarios, and they do, okay, 2 days out, we're code yellow because we know 4 inches of rain is coming. We're at 46 feet, 6 feet to crest. Okay, we're code. I don't want to get into too many details. I don't know the plans well enough, but there are a series of thresholds those dam operators are watching, and they know, all right, we get to yellow, we warn the community, we let them know the situation.
Put up at least some spillway 48 hours in advance or whatever to start dropping the water level down.
Right, if that needs to happen, if they notice a failure or any sort of seepage, like, yeah, all of that's laid out. What's not laid out is then how do we know we have an emergency, how do we get the people out of harm's way?
Okay, so you say we literally don't have that latter part of the emergency operations, but the action plan.
You want to fact check me on that?
There's so like Marshfield 6, there's a plan for a call tree of who GMP would call in that event. But as far as actually how that plan would be implemented, once they could place their call out, that's about where it stops, really. It would then be up to each local fire department to determine how they were going to do that. And I think this is also an educational piece that we could possibly do, you know, and I don't know if this is included in your bill, but letting people know that already, you know, and it's, I mean, as simple as a mailer to every address that's identified that's in those flood areas. So they at least know you are downstream of a dam. Because, you know, as we saw in 23, a lot of people didn't even realize they were in the floodplain until their home was flooding, you know, that pre-educational piece, I mean, you know, often pays huge dividends.
Yeah, I think that speaks really well to that pre-planning, I think you called it. So,
A couple of observations. Maybe overlooking an asset that is pretty ready to go on a moment's notice, and that would be a National Guard. The other things, maybe I'd start thinking about late 50s, early 60s. Khrushchev was around. They had active civil defense, had siren testings all throughout Vermont. Now they don't have to spin them up, they could use a klaxon. But I'm just thinking that in our own town's land policy plan, we have an operational plan that does include that, because the National Guard is in Newport. That's where the Army is. And they got all of the Humvees and et cetera vehicles that can, got snorkels and can do deep water. So thinking that maybe we ought to use our net assets that are already here. Those people live in the community. Food for thought.
Yeah, National Guard.
That is, we getting out early. Believe it. Mr. Farmer, would you like to comment on any of the testimonies that you've heard this afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, some good stuff, and it's great to hear from the RPCs, because, you know, they might be something that we try to leverage off, because as Representative Chapin said, that, you know, the onus of this bill is on BEM, and our capacity is pretty minimal. So how can we leverage, you know, an entity that's already reaching out to local municipalities and local first responders, eventually dam owners. So it's great to hear that. You know, it's good that you heard from Michael talking about these dams, right? A lot of people just don't know that they're out there. You know, the numbers that first witness talked about, you know, in 1,000 of these things out there. They're not all dangerous. Some are just a small thing out in the field, but there's a significant amount. I think of the one, if the Waterbury Dam has an issue, my office on the second floor is underwater. So, you know, there's significant issues there. You talk about 289 and what that means. So, you know, the idea of having emergency operations plans is a great idea. You talk a little bit about the National Guard. They roll with the USAR team, the Swiftwater team. So they go out once we know something is happening. You know, you could theoretically use it for evacuations, but the one thing I want to keep in the back of everyone's mind is BEM and the National Guard are not first responders. So we're not like on the clock, technically 24/7. Like we have a watch officer, but they have a call back in an hour because they're on, it's the term, right, standby. So by union rules, they have an hour to call back to their pager. So because we're not that instant command post, so you got to think of instant command post as the fire chief down at the flood, directing people where to go. The emergency operations center is back at either the town hall or the big one at the state level. You know, they're helping the incident command post, the boots on the ground. So we don't have that quick response. The guard doesn't have quick response. You know, they're usually 24 to 48 hours. So we do a lot of preemptive. It's going to snow badly. It's going to rain. Let's get our gears moving. But we don't have that quick response mechanism. Specifically, we're working to get a watch desk, we call it, where it moves from a 60-minute delay time to less than 15-minute delay time. But that's physicians and personnel. You know, even having a 24/7, 365 watch desk isn't one person. It's probably like 5, just between vacations and time, weekends. So, you know, lots of things there. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we're trying to set expectations for this bill and what VEM can actually do in the drop of a hat. You know, for me, it's a lot about that pilot project, right? You got to find those gaps using the pilot project. So, use those two dams, try to come up with some different templates, some different techniques. How are you gonna roll it out? How are you gonna include the RPCs? How are you gonna get all the municipalities in one room? Because that's extremely difficult. Now you're trying to get 5 fire departments, 3 EMS, and they might be covered by 2 different dispatchers. So how are you gonna communicate all that? You know, we do have some technology with VT alerts, so we talked about geocaching buildings where we can actually just draw a map on a circle on a map and call everyone's cell phone. We don't need to know the building's address. We can go straight to their landline. So we have that capability. But again, we can't do it in less than 60 minutes. So what does that mean? How do we get involved up front? How do we work with a dam owner to work on, okay, it's yellow. These are the things you're going to do. You're going to call us. And now we might be a little bit more postured to do what needs to be done. The fire chief is kind of ready. But really, a lot of these EOPs are at the local level. Right? They know the roads that they need to go on. They know the hill they need to climb to get out of the way. They know where their shelter is that they can go to. So you got to have all those municipalities on board. And unfortunately, they're all overtaxed and underpaid. So they don't have a lot of capacity to do this. And we run into that all the time where we have a state statute that says there's an emergency management director for each town, and they shall have these responsibilities. And then we just drop them right off and help support them. So we give them training, but they might not have the time. They're certainly not first responders. So, you know, when that dam calls them in the middle of the night, they may not even answer the phone because they don't sleep with it like I do. So they're just not ready for that. So you have to put them in the circle of information, but not first. Like as a first responder, so I'm a fire chief, like I get the page in the middle of the night. I'm up and out and all my people are up and out. So you need to have them be the first. They're the first circle of information. What does that mean? And what's the consecutive circles after that for support? You know, you can get people out, but they need to go somewhere. Okay, how are they going to get there? You have individuals that can't leave their house. How are they going to be? You know, and Michael with his signs, like all those things are integral parts of this, making sure that you get those, to Michael's point, 200 houses out in half an hour is a big task for Plainfield that has 11 firefighters, 2 trucks. So, you know, the pilot project is really got to dig into all of that. There's going to be some gaps that are going to need to be filled, you know, so timing, support, resources, and really figuring out what those gaps are so we can adjust them. And I think you need to have some legislative changes. How can you support EMDs more? How do you facilitate that at VEM so we have more capacities on RPCs? So really that's what I'm looking at with this bill is the pilot project is the first. You know, the second part about getting through all the stuff using the first part makes a lot of sense, but you gotta build the car before you drive it. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So it's great to hear all the input. I think everyone's on the same page, right? Dams are somewhat dangerous in a hierarchy of they're not going to go all the time, but when they do, it's really bad and really fast. So you need to be ready and able to handle that. It's much easier to do on a day like this than when it's raining cats and dogs. It's going to hardly be yellow, you know, and get the people in the room that. So it's a big lift, but it makes a lot of sense to do. That was my testimony for response.
Get tomorrow off. I got it on here.
Thank you very much. I guess meeting's adjourned.